Okay, good. So were there any questions since the last session?
So any questions?
Does anybody put your hand up if you have questions? Maybe speak to me.
I haven't seen any questions yet into the chat, but there was just the general ones about karma, so it's kind of, we can see how in, say, the coronavirus experience, if we're at home, we can find a good way to look at it. But once, if things get bad, like if we get really sick, then we kind of tend to think, oh no, that's different. That's too hard, that experience to transform.
No, it's true, isn't it? But I think it's what's interesting, if we talk about karma, I think it's so interesting that we talk about, which we never ask about, which we never talk about. We only talk about karma when it comes to the bad things. But the bigger picture with karma is really the basis of all Buddhist teachings, But it's something that many people don't look at and don't want to know about and just think it's superstition, or, like I say, sort of think it's something that's made up by the hippies or something in the 60s. But it's actually the fundamental point that is informing every single teaching of the Buddha. If without this view of karma, then the whole of Buddhism collapses into a heap of utter absurdity. So we have to understand it intellectually first. So that means we have to understand just the principle. So what the principle is, first we have to understand the mind. The mind is not physical. The mind is not the brain. And that everything, and the point is the Buddha's making is this, very simple. And he's observed this. This is not some belief thing. It wasn't revealed to him. He didn't make it up. It's his observation. This is the whole point of all of Buddha's teachings, is that every millisecond, what any mind does, whether it's the mind of an ant, a dog, a monkey, or other beings we can't see, or our own mind, every millisecond, without exception, is this really intricate process that just runs itself because it's habit of everything we think and do and say sows seeds in our mind. And seeds, as we know, will ripen in the future as various fruits. And the fruits here are simply our experiences. And so that means every millisecond what we think and do. So the next level of detail is every millisecond what we think and do and say that's labeled virtuous or positive, which is an action we do first with our body and speech that is informed by love, compassion, wisdom, kindness, generosity, a positive state of mind. Every millisecond of whatever we do and say and think that is labeled positive, and we should look into this, how we determine that, necessarily sow seeds that will ripen as happy experiences. And then the other piece of detail is naturally the opposite. Every millisecond of what we think and do and say that's driven by a delusion, driven by attachment or anger or jealousy or depression or anxiety or fears, you name it, necessarily sows a seed in the mind that will ripen in the future as unhappy experiences. This is the simple principle of karma. Now, as a concept, it's really easy. You can memorize that in 1 minute and repeat it back to me. But to internalize this as an actual, as a reality, not just some interesting belief, I think I believe in karma instead of, peanuts or something. It's actually the Buddha's explanation based on his own experience, obviously based on his experience at a subtle level of mind, because this is obviously not something that can be cognized with a gross level of mind. This is not something that can be cognized by conceptuality or sensory consciousness. It's obviously cognized by a subtle level of mind, which we have to hypothesize to even comprehend karma. Then this is the law that runs the universe, or this is the law, if you like, within which the universe runs. So just like botany, no one made up botany. No one's got copyright on botany. Clever botanists aren't people who created the concept of botany. And this is the crucial point about what science means, and this is what natural law is, and this is the Buddha's approach. That a person who's a clever person who observes the workings of gardens, this person has come up with the way to identify the process itself, and then has learned to look into it, and has then codified this as a series of laws, and then presents it. So they don't make it up. They don't own it. But that's how we think of creation, that somebody owns it and made it up. No, and then runs it. Well, nobody runs botany. Botany runs itself. And so just like with botany or math or anything else that we call science, that's exactly, and I mean precisely and exactly, the approach that the Buddhist view takes, the Buddha takes, that is the law that runs the universe. So the logic of karma then is, do you want happiness, the very first level of practice, when you learn this in entry-level junior school, do you want happiness, Robina? Yep. Do you not want suffering? So this is why in the first stages of practice, it's framed in terms of suffering and stopping it. So naturally we get obsessed about the negativity, but every millisecond of what we think and do and say. So if we have a day in which things go well, how'd you go today, Robina? Oh, I had a lovely day. Tell me about it. Are you happy? Yes. What happened? So I will proceed to describe every single thing that happened out there. The weather was nice. Miffy was kind to me. The boyfriend was lovely. John was pleasant. The food was delicious. The cool air on a hot day was very pleasant. So all of this, which we totally take for granted, which we never question for 1 millisecond, why? Is because we've got this deep attachment that is this hubris, this arrogance, this assumption, this sense of entitlement that I deserve only the good things. So when all the good things happen, we literally take it for granted. We never think for 1 second that it's the process of the law of karma. Every millisecond that you call happiness is the fruit of an action called virtuous action in the past, that you did in the past, that is now ripening. Its fruit is now ripening as that moment of pleasant cool on a hot day, that moment of pleasant heat on a cool day, that pleasant taste of food. This is the law of karma. It's this intricate natural law within which the world runs. But whoever thinks that? We take for granted the good things. We have this hubris, this arrogance, and we assume we deserve only the good things. So attachment's job is to make us get the good things every second. And then the second a bad thing happens, the second the temperature's too low or too high or the coffee's not hot enough, then we get annoyed, upset, irritated, because attachment just didn't get what it wanted. And then what we think is, how dare the coffee do that? How dare John do that? How dare Miffy do this? I don't deserve this. So we get all upset. And then we think, oh, that's karma, negative karma. Wow, bad, poor me. But that's just, so we only then start to think about karma when the bad things happen. I mean, I've never yet had a person ask the question, why do good things happen? We just take them for granted. Never had a person ask that question ever. Even I remember one time, the typical one we ask is some little girl who gets abused by her daddy and is poor or left on the street or harmed. We go, the first thing, we are shocked. We say, oh, you mean she deserves that? Well, then I asked the question in return. I said to this fellow, so what about you? Would you have a nice mummy, nice daddy, good family, good education, lovely food? Yes, he said. And I said, well, do you ever ask the question, you mean I deserve that? He couldn't even hear it. He didn't even know what I meant, because we assume karma is bad things. So when we understand this, and we understand that these views we have are underpinned by attachment and aversion. Attachment is this outrageous sense of entitlement. It runs all the time. It's just an assumption that I'd better get the good things and I deserve the good things. So we don't ask why. We just give me more, please. We don't care why. And then as the minute a bad thing happens, this is why we suffer. This is why we suffer. We are outraged. How dare a bad thing happen? I don't deserve it. This is what's underneath attachment and aversion. So when we hear karma within that framework, it sounds like this monstrous kind of punishment and reward. But in Buddhism, there is no punisher. There is no rewarder. There's no such concept. It's just a natural law. And guess what? Every one of those experiences, who is the main cause of those? You, baby. When? 42-7 lives ago, next life, past life, whatever. That's why to even take the view of karma, the big picture point of view, you've got to posit this possibility. 1, your consciousness is not physical, and 2, it's got its own continuity of mental moments. It goes back and back and back, and that it's programmed every second by this natural law. Well, this programming is occurring. So then you start to take responsibility. And then the first point here is, do I want happiness? Yes. Well, Buddha says, honey child, then you better start causing it. Do you not want suffering? No. Well, then stop causing it. That's the first level of practice. Getting our head around this is the first level of practice. But it's so difficult for us because we have these views from countless lives of ignorance, Buddha says, that just take all this stuff for granted and they have blame and reward and punishment and I'm bad and blah, blah, blah. So the bigger picture is so important to understand, And it takes a while to really apply this. It takes a while to really apply it. And to own it. And that's the thing that's implied by the law of karma. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation. It's an outrageous view, the view we tend to have. If you're a Christian, God made you. And okay, you don't want to blame God, but he's the boss. And if you're a materialist, mummy and daddy made you. In each case, somebody made you. That's the wackiest idea for the Buddha, I have to say. He doesn't talk like that, he's polite. It's just a weird schizophrenic idea that someone can make you, that someone can give you love and give you happiness and give you anger. It's too weird for the Buddha. His view is so much more integrated and so much more nuanced. With respect. Obviously I'm a fan of the Buddha. I think the Buddha's great. I like his views, I'm trying to internalize them. And this is the point about first level of practice. Beginning to abide by the laws of karma is the fundamental first level of practice. Junior school, entry level, grade 1. Don't harm others. Why not, Buddha? Well, if I'm a Christian, God says, Jesus says, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't jump on the wrong partner. Well, so does Buddha. So you've got to ask Jesus why, and that's the difference. Why? But guess what, honey? Because God said, because he's the boss. I'm not complaining, but that's not the Buddha's answer. That's laughable. That's like going to the doctor. Why shouldn't I smoke cigarettes? Because I say so. And if you do, you're going to get cancer. I'm going to punish you. That's our view. We made that view up. Buddha says it's an illogical view. So the Buddha's not telling us to not kill. His view, his reason to tell us not to kill is because guess what, Robina? The things that you do will sow seeds in your mind that'll produce your future experiences. So, honey, it's like, do you want future suffering? No, well, don't smoke, your doctor will say. And the Buddha will say, well, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Why? Because they're the heaviest actions. Actions you do that are driven by delusions that harm others are the heaviest ones. So at least he gets us to control our body and speech first, to control the servants of our crazy delusions, at least harness them first. Why? So you don't get future suffering. This is hard for us in the West because we hear it as like, oh, you mean that sounds selfish. We think we have to do it for the sake of others. That comes later, baby. You've got to have compassion for yourself first and realize you make yourself. You are the creation of yourself. It's an outrageous idea, It's quite shocking, quite intense for us. But we hear it as punishment and reward. That's what we dump on it. Buddha's not talking like that. There's no such thing as a punisher. There's no person out there rewarding. It's a natural law. My Catholic mother used to say, virtue has its own rewards. That's what Buddha's saying. And that eventually is what compels us to want to practice. Because who would want to cause themselves future suffering? And the thing is, we know this when it comes to ordinary things like food. We know that what you put in your body now produces your future body. We get the idea. But when it comes to the mind, we have a whole other set of weird ideas, So it's hard with those views to argue with them and then to put Buddha's view there and to start to live according to it. It takes time. But because it's happening every millisecond. But we have this schizophrenic, weird idea that, I'm allowed to do what I like. I'm allowed to think what I like. I'm allowed to say what I like. This kind of petulant child who's not going to be told what to do anymore. That's how we hear about these instructions. You don't tell me what to do. The point is Buddha's just giving us instructions like a good doctor. You don't say to the doctor, don't you dare tell me not to smoke. Who do you think you are? You're grateful to her kind advice because you don't want cancer. And equally, if you think it's your doctor just punishing you, and then you go home and you see there's no doctor, so out come the Marlboros, I won't get cancer, she doesn't see me smoke. That's how we think of morality. It's very childish. This is a natural law, Buddha says. You become, and already the implication of living according to this law is you become accountable. You realize you create yourself. It's so profound, You become your own boss. You become your own creator. It's a very profound idea. But it takes us a while, I tell you.
So then, Venerable, there are a couple of questions to do with say, for instance, with mantras. So Glennis has asked,
no, I don't want to hear that question yet. It's just off the topic. I don't want to hear that yet. Later, Glennis.
Righto.
So, this takes time to internalize this view. This really takes time to internalize. But we've got to listen to it. This is the thing too about study. We think, I don't want to study, I want to practice, we say. I remember people saying, this is too intellectual, I don't want intellectual, I don't want philosophy, I want to practice. Well, that's like saying, I don't want to hear the recipes of cakes, I just want to make a cake. Well, don't be ridiculous. You've got to have the recipe first. You've got to squeeze your brain, as Lama Yeshe says first. Because how can you see, this is the thing about what being a Buddhist means. We're so obsessed with being a Buddhist means watching your breath or something, or walking slowly, or being mindful. I am being sarcastic. It's just absurd. Being a Buddhist is internalizing Buddha's views, making them your views. That's what being a Buddhist means. Not just looking around looking like a nice person, being mindful and slow. I wouldn't be a Buddhist, period, if that's what the criterion of a Buddhist is. It's hearing the teachings. And that's where you've got to have a valid source. There's so much rubbish published out there. People make up their own trips. Some Westerner goes to a meditation retreat for a weekend and has a nice experience, and they write a book about it. We're so arrogant, because we think all this stuff is what you can believe what you like. We think it's all made up, We're very superstitious in the West, I have to say. This is clear views that have been presented from the experience of great beings, and you track them right back to the time of the Buddha. So you better get valid sources when you're going to start reading this stuff, and hear valid teachers, check up on people. Don't just believe what we're told, it's so important. That means just study it, read it, think about it, and then, there's different levels of realizations. You first just, even by listening, sometimes with the penny drops, doesn't it? You go, oh, I get that. That's the first level. You get realizations from listening, then you get realizations from thinking it through, and then from meditating on it. There's levels and levels of internalizing this stuff. And we can't skip any of the steps, And then every day it begins to make sense more and more. But you've got to apply it in your daily life. And this is what's so hard. As Lama Zopa says, this is a deeper level of using karma. That every millisecond of what's out there, the way the world, is our own karmic appearances. That's how they talk about it. We just think it's all the world. This is emptiness too. This is implying it and it leads to it. But we just think everything out there, we're kind of plonked on this earth that's already made, already set up. Friends, enemies and strangers are all out there, and I'm this innocent victim who's plonked into the middle of this mess, and then bad things and good things happen unfairly or kind of randomly. I mean, it's a superstitious view of the world. That's how we think now. No wonder we're neurotic. No wonder we suffer. So when you start to realize that whatever appears to you out there, whoever you meet, a pretty person, an ugly person, a nice sound, a pleasant sound, sickness, health, whatever, it is not a random event. It is the fruit of your actions. That's why we have to understand the 4 ways that karma ripens. It describes the entire universe. One is the type of rebirth you get. Well, first we've won the lottery. We've got a human body, like a miracle. Virtue, not a miracle, it's the result of virtue, but it's like, if you look at the numbers, I mean, there are probably 7 billion mosquitoes in your little backyard under one tree in one evening. Well, there's 7 billion humans. I mean, obviously it's easier to get a mosquito birth or a dog birth or a kangaroo birth even than a human one. So that's logical. That implies it must be special to be a human, even though we're a bunch of idiots and do dumb things with our lives. Just to get the human body, which is what happens at the time of death, the karma ripens, particular conditions occur, and then your virtuous karmic seed, because whatever you do, nothing goes astray. Everything is stored in your bank vault. There's not a millisecond of what we think and do and say since beginning this time that is not stored as memories and as seeds in our mind. This is pretty outrageous too. So one of those virtuous karmic seeds of non-killing, practiced as Lama Zopa says in the context of not killing, living in vows of not killing in a past life, was triggered at the time of our past death, not more than 7 weeks before we found our way to our mummy's fallopian tube. So that's the first way our karma has ripened, already like a miracle, getting a human body. Second, then within this human body, there is your mind, how it functions, your tendencies. So you've got the Hitler tendencies and Mother Teresa tendencies. Look at the 2 differences, the spectrum. We're in there somewhere, aren't we? Some positive, some negative. Every one of those is a habit. That's called intentions similar to the cause. Your tendencies, your bunch of habits, your personality traits. They do not come from your mummy and daddy. This is very clear for the Buddha. These were triggered, the seeds of our personality traits were triggered several weeks before your mother and father had sex. They were in your mind already from your own past habits. Number 2, your tendencies are yours. 3, this is the other one. We're very social beings, aren't we? We live on this planet surrounded by sentient beings, mummies and daddies and sisters and rats and cockroaches and enemies and friends and people out there. Well, look at it. So every millisecond of those experiences, every one of those is called an experience similar to the cause. In other words, the way we're seen and treated by others is an experience similar to a cause that I did in the past. So every millisecond of since you're conceived up to now, you think about your life. It's not complicated. You've been bumping into sentient beings, haven't you? And you can divide those sentient beings into friends, enemies, and strangers. That's it. There's no 4th category. So friends are people who are kind to you. What's that the fruit of? Your past virtue of being kind to them. Karma's personal, baby. Second, those who are mean to you. And often the kind ones turn into mean ones, don't they? John was lovely and now he's horrible. That's how we are. So the second one, everyone who's mean to you. Who's the main cause of that? Your past action of being mean to them. Not being kind of silly. 3 is the indifferent ones, the strangers. So you've got friends, enemies, and strangers. Since you're born up to now, you can divide all your experiences into these 3 categories. Happy ones, sad ones, and indifferent ones, That's it. So that's called experiences similar to the cause. 4th is even the way the physical world impacts upon you. This is really described beautifully, and I was mentioning it before, when we understand the Tantric teachings about the subtle physical energies and the way our mind is impacted on the body and the body is impacted by the mind. So even the physical world out there. So in other words, the 4 results, for example, of one action called non-killing, a virtuous action of non-killing. First result, you get a human body. Second result, you're born with a tendency not to kill. Third result, you won't get killed and you won't die young. Fourth result, the environment will not harm you. It will benefit you. Main cause of why you're not sick right now. Main cause of why you are not sick right now. Main cause of why the physical world is not harming you right now. You're not getting COVID-19. Main cause is because of your past non-killing karma. Main cause of why you're not getting sick now and dying young is because of your past karma of not killing. Main cause of how come you don't have a tendency to kill, your past action of not killing. Main cause of you getting a human body, your past action of not killing. Wow, we are the cause of it all. Turn it around. Your main cause of being born as a dog or a rat or an ant from past killing. The main cause of you having a tendency, even in a human body, of killing. Look at the world. Most people kill. Most people kill something. Even most religions, with respect, say it's okay to kill certain people. It's okay. Not for the Buddha. No sentient being wants to be killed, he says. So you're having a tendency to kill. You wake up in this life and you want to kill. Why? Because you killed before. And of course you think it's good because the world supports it. 3, you get killed or you die young. That's the fruit of killing. 4, the environment, physical world harms you. So we are the creators of all of our experiences every second. Not just the bad things, not just occasionally. It's not punishment, not reward. It's a natural law that runs the universe. That's the big picture about karma that we've got to become familiar with, if we choose to. No one's forcing us. Then the point is, so then you apply it. You don't just leave it in your head. You apply it, which means you use these principles to interpret your life. Then you can begin to practice Dharma. Then you can begin to practice with this basis. Otherwise, we don't know why things are happening. This is one of the major reasons we suffer terribly, having the materialist view. If you've got the Christian view or the Muslim view and you have real faith in God, at least you have a reason why things happen. It's God's will. This is a profound teaching. I can't tell you how profound that is. It's not my view. But if you really live in the according, like those 2 Muslim mummies and daddies, they were content. She belongs to God. He has taken her back. We are happy. This is a profound view, to have faith in God as a creator. That means whatever he does, he's the boss. He's got a plan. He's got the plan in his pocket. You don't need to know the plan. You've got faith in him. That's a pretty powerful way to live your life. You'd be a very happy person if you lived that way. So look at all the people who call themselves Muslims and Christians and Hindus who believe in a creator, but second guess God the whole time and moan and complain because God does this and God does that. I mean, how dare you if you say you believe in a creator? You better, you should be happy if you believe in a creator. He's omniscient. He's got a plan for eons. He knows what he's doing. You accept it. That's a profound view, but it's just not the Buddha's view. That's all. You created your experiences. When you own that, then you stop suffering. That's why I always quote those experiences of my Tibetan friends. One jig droll for years and years, back in 87, he was one of the involved in Tibet, in Lhasa. He was a monk involved in one of the, like in this mini uprising against the Chinese communists in 87, the first mini uprising really since 59. It was huge. And so many got clamped down and tortured and imprisoned, and he was part of that, and he got tortured and he thought he'd better escape. He escaped and came to Nepal. He was telling me about it. This is like 30 years ago. And then he talked about his father got murdered, brother got murdered. He was sad. There were tears, and he was sad. And I said to him very casually, "Do you ever get angry, Joel?" And he laughed casually. "Angry, Robina? What for? It's our own fault." He laughed. That's hilarious, outrageous for our view. But he just naturally has the view of karma. These Tibetans have been having the view of karma in their bones for 1,200 years. We've got in our bones the materialist view. We think that's the truth. Well, that for them is the truth. They don't have to think about it. They just know why things are happening. And this is where we can begin to understand more deeply where anger and attachment are so related to karma. Like I said, so he doesn't have anger, which means he doesn't have the view, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve it. That's the voice of anger. How dare that happen to me? I don't deserve it. That's the voice of anger. It's profound. That's the philosophy of anger. And you only have that if you believed that your mother made you. You believe you were chucked on this planet by somebody else and no one consulted you first, because no one certainly consulted you. We didn't ask to get born, as we say. If you really have that view, of course you're going to have anger when bad things happen. It's logical to have anger because you didn't ask to get born. You've never met Fred before. Fred comes along and steals your money. How dare he do that? I don't deserve it. Well, you're right. You don't deserve it if you began in your mother's womb. You're absolutely right. But if your mind goes back and back and back, then you know it's, and they don't use the word deserve. We put that heavy meaning in, deserve. They don't say that. It's just the result of karma. He laughed. What do you mean angry, Robina? It's our own fault. It's such a simple way to put it. Meaning he understands, these Tibetans understand that this is the fruit of their past actions. They're not moaning about it. They get out there and they demonstrate to try to change it because it is wrong, but they know why it's happening. They know why it's happening. They're not ranting and raving against it. That's why we suffer terribly. We suffer terribly because we have no view why things happen. We don't know why things happen, so we have panic attacks every minute. I mean, no wonder we're all crazy. And it's reasonable. It's understandable. It's not being rude. It's logical if we unpack it like this. So the view of karma is profound. Buddhism would not stand up on one leg without the view of karma. It's just a load of rubbish, Buddhism just being a load of nonsense. And of course we think of it like that because we think it's a bunch of beliefs. It's not beliefs, it's his view of reality. He's not asking you to believe it, like Einstein isn't. Like when I told that New Zealand man, the scientist, I always quote that. Who revealed the teaching to the Buddha? He asked me. I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings to him? No, of course you wouldn't. Well, the same here. No one revealed it to him. He observed it. And he's telling you, this is my methodology. Over to you. If I'm wrong, fine. You work it out. Don't believe me. Don't just shove it down your throat mindlessly. Think about it. Take it as your hypothesis. And the key point from the beginning of the karmic one is the implication of it. We become accountable. We become grown up. It lessens attachment. It lessens anger when you really apply it. That's the point. It's not evident initially that that's what happens. But as you apply it as a philosophy, as a view of reality, it's incredible, amazing. But you have to apply it. It's huge. And of course it implies emptiness. It's dependent arising. Now ask me some questions about karma. That's a summary.
So the questions aren't directly about karma, but okay. So I have one about, when you first hear about karma, it can explain things, and then there comes a point where you kind of go, I don't want to believe in karma because of that having to be accountable.
Well, believing and not believing, I understand, but first of all, I know you're using those words, but believing and not believing is not the issue.
But it's really hard to kind of not fall into that trap of belief, to actually take the time to start verifying it for yourself because it's so complex.
Well, you can't verify it for yourself first. And that's jumping ahead of the game. You can't verify. If you go to an acupuncturist and they start describing all the serious and the sophisticated philosophy of acupuncture to you, you've never heard it before, you can't try and prove it then. You've got to go through the process of going to junior school, next school, and going each step of the way. So all you can do there is you learn it and you take it as your hypothesis. That's what makes me want to learn acupuncture. I have to accept, I've heard a teacher talk about it. I can't possibly prove it yet. I can't possibly prove Einstein is right yet. What do? I started junior school, but I've got to first check that Einstein's a valid guy. I've got to first check that the acupuncturist is a valid person. I've got to first check that Buddha seems like a valid person. That's the homework I do. Then I start at the scratch. I start at the beginning, but with the assumption, when you start to study math, it's on the assumption that you're heading towards Einstein. You can't prove it yet, but you're moving towards it, and you're checking the boxes each step of the way. You have to check, you prove that 1 + 1 is 2. Good start. Go from there, then you prove multiplication, then you prove division, then you get to algebra, and you keep proving as you go. And as the Dalai Lama says, if you follow Buddhism like that and you get to a point where you can prove Buddha's wrong, of course you must reject him. So that's the process. It's a very integrated, subtle, step-by-step process. You can only prove it by going one step at a time. Same with acupuncture, same with karma. So it means you've got to study it. And go on, what?
Sometimes we have this kind of tendency to think, okay, so then karma, everything's a dependent arising, therefore we can just dissolve everything into emptiness and it'll be fine.
Well, I don't think that. If you think that, are you making something up here? You always thinking what people say.
But it's a process I've noticed that people go through.
What do you mean?
Almost like you're saying of not going through each of the steps, just jumping straight to, well, it's a dependent arising or emptiness, but still being miserable.
Yeah, because it's not even the correct words, and it's intellectual knowledge. It's not useful. So anyway, what else? Any other questions there? What's Francis? So everyone, what is dependent arising? Okay, I'll talk about that, Francis. Go on. First, go on. Say what else, Miffy?
There were things about the mantras. So that
I don't want to go off. No, I don't want to go off the topic. No. Not yet. We'll do it later. But was it related to karma or not? Mantras.
Yes, so our mantras, do they work because of intention, like with a karmic intention?
I mean, what do you mean by work? What do you mean by work? Who asked that question?
Glenys Hargrave.
Glenys, what do you mean by work, honey? You've got to explain. What do you mean by work? It's not some kind of magic pill. You've got to talk to me, Glenys. What do you mean by work, baby? Unmute Glenys, please.
I'm just going to try. Here we is. Asked to unmute.
Got it. Go, John. What do you mean by work?
Okay. Well, my question's about, I've heard the Dalai Lama say in regards to, world bad events that happen, that prayers won't help, action helps, do action rather than prayer. And I just wondered about how mantras, like say for today being the day that Sangha have been asked to do mantras for the full 24 hours.
Right.
So how does...
Well, first of all, your first point is you're saying the Dalai Lama says it doesn't work, and now you're asking me how it does work. So which one are you asking me about? There are 2 points there.
Well,
I'll just tell you, my projection is the Dalai Lama just talks, he always talks at the level of ordinary people. So instead of saying, we'll pray for you, he's saying, just get on with it, please, and do some work, action. He doesn't really accept that prayer doesn't work, because he does it himself. So he's just being very down to earth. That's the first point. The second point, your question is, how does prayer work? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, how does everyone saying mantras, in particular today, how does that affect what's happening in the world?
Mm-hmm. Okay, have you been in a room, have you sometimes been around a bunch of people where they're all angry and they're all fighting?
Yeah.
Okay, have you been in a room where people have been pleasant to each other?
Yes.
So even if they're not talking, wouldn't people say you can cut the atmosphere with a knife, don't they?
Yeah.
Why is that? When they're not speaking, what are they? They're not even punching or speaking. What's happening?
Oh, the tension.
And where's it come from?
You can feel it.
Where's it come from?
From their emotions. Everyone that's
mind,
there,
dear. You got body, speech, and mind, Glennis. You got body, speech, and mind, right? If there's no anger, if there's nobody saying angry words, and there's nobody speaking angry words, where's the anger? Where you feel it like in the atmosphere? Where is that existing? In the mind, right? So if you can be among a group of people with angry thoughts, look at the effect it has. So if you can be among a group of people who've got pleasant thoughts, look at the effect it has. We'll just multiply that by a few million people having positive thoughts of compassion and love. Of course it's going to have an effect. You can see it in the world.
Okay.
Are you seeing my point?
Yeah.
No.
So,
are you seeing what I'm saying? That's one answer. That's one aspect. Whatever the mind does produces an environment around it. Because the mind is whatever, everything. It's like incredible, you know.
Yep.
I mean, and then the other one is you got to, because we've got to talk about the power of Buddhas here, and that's a hard one for the West. What is a Buddha? A Buddha is a person like you who has perfected their mind, and their mind being not physical now is no longer confined by space or time or matter, because the mind is no longer deluded. So that consciousness, which is beginningless and endless, just like yours, which is now an enlightened mind, it means it's infinitely full of compassion, infinitely full of wisdom, and infinitely powerful. And that mind is hugely powerful mind. Buddhas are hugely powerful, amazing, real beings. So if they're being invoked, they're doing their job of benefiting sentient beings every second. They're real beings who exist in the universe. So they're doing incredible work. So by us collectively connecting with the Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, connecting with the mantra, we're purifying our minds, we're affecting things around us, and the Buddhas are very happily doing their job of helping others, because that's what they become a Buddha for. Not sitting there looking holy in the sky. They're there to benefit sentient beings at a more subtle, more profound, more vast level. Does that make sense? Okay.
And then Venerable Francis Lamont asked, what is a dependent arising?
Okay, yeah, exactly. Well, this is all... If we look at the Lamrim, as you know, you've been studying it and everything, you start at this first level, you abide by the laws of karma. The whole thing about karma at the very first level, the explicit purpose of the teachings of karma at the first level of practice is simply control your body and control your speech, honey, because you don't want to sow seeds in your mind that'll ripen as future suffering. That's one of the things. So, but the implicit teaching, when we start to go further, the implicit teaching about karma is it's the proof. It's the first example of how things exist in dependence upon things. So the logic here is cause and effect, that everything you think and do and say will produce results. That's cause and effect. So cause and effect is the first example of the broader principle that Buddha says says runs the universe, which everything exists interdependently. Things exist interdependently. And why he's telling us that is because ego thinks things aren't interdependent. We think things are set in stone. We think things are absolute. We think that things are black and white and there's no shift and movement, and we don't think things are caused. So the implicit teaching of karma is a marvelous example of the first level of dependent arising. Dependent arising is the term they use in Tibetan. It's like the Buddhist slogan, as His Holiness said. Another term for it is everything exists interdependently. Everything exists in dependence upon various factors. There's nothing set in stone. We don't exist in an island, like we say. Things are interdependent. So cause and effect is a good example of interdependence, of dependent arising. There are more subtle levels, which we learn about as we get towards the more advanced levels of the wisdom wing, we learn about emptiness. Because dependent arising is the logic that is the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe says, that proves that nothing has an intrinsic nature. Of course, all of these things are abstract to us because we don't think. Buddha's basically telling us we are all thinking that everything has an intrinsic nature. Whoever thought for 1 second we ever thought that things had an intrinsic nature, we don't even know what it means. But this is what he's telling us. So he's preparing our mind, first with karma, then we get to the high school level, we start to talk about the mind, and then we get to the bodhisattva path, and then we get to the 6 perfections, and then we get to emptiness. So everything is leading us and priming our minds ready to get to that one, where we start to learn about the actual way that the universe exists, you know. And we'll talk about this at some point, I'm sure we will. I just keep saying it. What else, Miffy?
Wolfgang Dreher has a question that what are the tantric methods to reduce attachments?
Well, Wolfgang, okay, there's different levels of practice in Buddhism, like I've been implying already. So the junior school level, which as you know from the Langri is the teachings, and as Lama Zopa Politsi calls it, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability. And then you get the teachings and practices suitable to the disciples of the middle capability. And then you get the teachings and practices suitable to the disciples of the greatest capability, which is the Mahayana path. So the wisdom wing is junior school and high school, the first and second scopes of the Lamrim. So if attachment's the main problem, okay, the first level of practice, which is controlling your body and speech. Basically, given that we're driven by attachment, this is the primordial delusion that runs the entire samsaric universe, given that we're driven by attachment, at the very first level, junior school level, is don't worry about the attachment yet. Just control the servants of your attachment and back off and don't kill and don't steal and don't lie and don't jump on the wrong partner and don't do bad things to harm others because they're driven by attachment and aversion. So you control the servants of attachment. That's the first level of practice. And that's where you live in the vows of no killing and no stealing because they put atomic bombs on these tendencies and you begin to harness your crazy attachment. So having harnessed the servants of your attachment and thus protected yourself from future suffering, you now go to the next level of practice and now you start to delve into the mind itself because you've controlled your body and speech, you've got a bit of space now, and now you begin to unpack and unravel your mind and really start to work with the attachment itself to really understand in a sophisticated way what attachment is, and you begin to recognize it and you begin to change it. That's the next level of attachment, hands-on, putting your hands in deep into the attachment and harnessing it. Now the next level, at the compassion wing, you could then now say you've harnessed your body, speech and mind to such a degree that now you can begin to see that the whole world is in the same boat, and you begin to develop this incredible empathy and compassion for others, and your compassion overrides your attachment. You've still got attachment, but it's really harnessed because now you have more love and more compassion than attachment. So then you get to the tantric level, the most sophisticated level, based on renunciation of delusions and karma, based on compassion and based on understanding emptiness. The most sophisticated level is you actually engage in attachment. You engage with an object of attachment. Why? It's a technical reason, because engaging with an object of attachment triggers what we call pleasure. And the greatest yogis who've got renunciation, who've got bodhicitta, and who've got realization of emptiness, they're qualified now to utilize attachment without going berserk. As Lama Yeshe says, they're able to use the poison as a method to remove the poison. It's the most sophisticated level of using it, of getting rid of attachment. That's a simple explanation, Wolfgang. It's the most sophisticated level, okay? Wolfgang's in San Francisco. Oh, no, where is he? In San Francisco? Yeah. No, you're in San Jose, aren't you? San Jose, yeah, California. And I saw that, where else? Who was somebody up at midnight over there? Who was somebody in the East Coast? Oh, yeah, Catherine, you're in North Carolina. You must be at 1 a.m., isn't it?
And there's someone in New York and someone in Nova Scotia in Canada.
Nova Scotia, there you go. They're all on the East Coast. They're all 1 a.m. God almighty. Well done. Good. So what else, people?
Venerable, there was also ages ago a question about from Robin Bean about the different kind of approaches to organ donation, because, you know, on one hand it's like a way that we can actually practice generosity.
It's good, yeah. Well, it's a very okay. Let's talk about it. It's a very interesting point. What do you mean the different levels, different ways? What do you mean by different?
Well,
ways?
And then the other hand, like Lama Zopa Rinpoche saying about you know, not doing organ donation because he expects us to be able to meditate while we're dying. You know, so to not disturb the body like that.
Oh, no, I see what you're saying. But on the other hand, I mean, in his book, you know, How to Face Death Without Fear, this book that's just the revised version of this book about death that's come out now. I don't know if it's in Australia yet. But in there's a chapter, the different scenarios of when you die, what to do if your loved one dies at home, what to do if your loved one dies in hospital, what to do if your loved one's going to give their organs. And it's a very interesting topic. I mentioned before, I've mentioned some of this. So I'll talk about it now. So, of course, he praises hugely all the Tibetan Lamas do. Anybody who wants to give their organs, he said it's equivalent to a bodhisattva offering their body. It's incredible that your motivation is so pure. So, you know, and having that motivation when you die is really auspicious and beneficial. But, you know, when you understand what they do, they keep you alive, they keep you breathing, they keep your heart beating. And so then so that you can be prepared to get you on the operating table, and because they think that you are dead, they think you're dead, but clearly from the Buddhist view you're not dead, because your subtle mind is still there. And this is where I mentioned this book. I think I mentioned the book by this fellow. About the, you know, people now really understanding. You know, people having the out-of-body experiences during the operation. Well, exactly the same thing can happen when you're supposedly dead, because when your gross consciousness has ceased and your body has ceased, your senses have ceased, that's when we think we're dead in the West, but you're not dead, because your subtle mind, which is the same mind as your dream mind, that's still there. That's still there. And so they're keeping you breathing, and the reason that you, as Lama Zopa says, if you're able to be kept breathing, and the implication is if you're able to have your heart beating and your body's all toasty and warm, the only reason that can happen is because the mind is still there, the subtle mind though, and that we don't posit in the West, do we? So there was this interesting experience. The same man in this book explained that this woman who was on the operating table, who's giving her organs, she died, purely, obviously with a pure motivation to give her organs, how marvellous, which would have triggered a virtuous karmic seed before she stopped breathing to program her for her next life. So there she is, being kept breathing and her heart beating, and she's on the operating table. And in this book he talks about how the nurse who was monitoring the heartbeat said as soon as they got the circular saw to cut her from head to toe, her heart went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And he joked and said, what has a dead person got to be anxious about? Well, you know, the explanation of that from the Buddhist perspective is very clear. Because if you can be in under anesthetic, which means your gross consciousness has ceased, your senses have ceased, but so you're fast asleep when you have an operation, aren't you? You don't feel anything. But some people have this experience of observing it. Well, this is exactly the same thing can happen. So we can deduce that woman, her subtle mind was conscious and she was observing what's happening, and she's suddenly thinking, Jesus God, don't they realize I'm still alive? They're going to cut me from head to toe. So of course she freaks out. Of course her heart would go to 200 beats a minute. Of course she's having, so then she would have probably died, and to die with that panic attack could easily reverse the karma and cause her to have negative karma, because the ego rose so powerfully, freaked her out completely. I mean, that doesn't follow from everybody. I mean, you know, not everybody has these experiences when they have their operation, and not everybody would be aware at a subtle level while they're having their organs cut out either. So it might disturb many people, but that's a really serious type of case. It could easily disturb very badly. So as Rinpoche says, there's certain practices you can do to help, but that is a danger. And as he said, they've got to talk about this. Got to talk about this. But of course, the West, we don't talk about it like this, do we? So it's not an easy thing to think about, because if it can be really disturbing for you, then what's the point, of giving your organs? It's all very nice. I mean, I'm not being cynical about it. It's incredible. I know many people who've had their new hearts and livers, and they're so grateful. But I mean, he was quite cynical, this man, in this book about the business, because it's so elitist. It charges the most amount of money, and it's really, I mean, they're manipulating people like crazy. Even in many European countries now, they've made the law, the default law is your organs will be taken unless you've agreed otherwise. So it's really quite manipulative, quite powerful. And he was he's in the medical business. He was quite cynical about it. So that's a downside of it, you know.
So venerable, actually, we do have experiences where, say, we might be in an accident and we're in shock. So our body goes into shock just because of like habit, but our mind, our emotions can be quite calm.
So what's the
So
point?
would that be possible too, that maybe, you know, she just had this kind of habitual response?
No, the body, no, that's not showing a proper understanding of the body and the mind. When you have this view, which the Tibetan medical system has, which is the Vajrayana has, your body will not go into shock without your mind doing it, because the mind drives the wind energies and drives the physical. If your mind is peaceful, your body would not have a shock. No way. That's the materialist view. It's not possible. It's not possible for the body to have a shock, because the body's driven by the mind, and the mind is coursing through all these channels and impacts upon the physical. So even though part of you still, it's possible that you're having a shock. No, it's possible. Like, I can think of a mother, let's say, who's in a car accident, and all she's thinking about is her child in the next seat. Still there'll be kind of some other stuff happening, but the virtue overrides the delusions. So that's a possibility. It's a possibility. But you've got to know the person's mind well. It's just dangerous, that's all. And the other one, of course, is that if you want to die peacefully and die well, if you're a yogi, then of course you wouldn't do that. You'd want to have your body stay there for several days so you can meditate. Of course, most of us aren't that clever, you know. So it's a very interesting point, anyway. You have to have a very high level of, Robin says what? You have to have a very high level of what? She's saying something.
Of bodhicitta, to be willing to go through that.
Oh,
but at the same time, high-level practitioners are more likely to be practicing at the time of death and not donating their organs.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's where, it is amazing to just give it your organ, but there are so many other ways you can help. There's so many other ways you can, my feeling is giving my old bag of bones to young people who want to learn about, what's the word, learn about the body? Anatomy. That's a good gift as well. But it's made so holy as if it's the most special gift on the planet, Isn't it? It's talked about like that.
So Rachel's asking, can you still be a bit nervous about it, but determined to give with a good intention?
Of course, darling. It's just because if we don't have control over the situation, your motivation is good, but it's not the only thing. If you don't have control over the death process, and you don't have control over the conditions that determine it, if you don't have control, it's just more dangerous. Of course it's marvellous to give your organ, but it's not the only thing you can do, is my opinion. You've got to think about these things. It's all, like any decision, you've got to be informed. So here we're talking about the Buddhist view of how to be informed. So you just got to make your decision in an informed way, that's all. What else? More questions there?
No more questions, but I have one, this idea of, say, thought transformation, when we have a problem and then we, find another way to look at it.
Yeah.
Occasionally people can say you are being a bit Pollyanna about it, or just kind of
but this is,
so how can we tell if we're...
I understand. Okay. So what Miffy's asking about is this: is in the more advanced, in the Mahayana level of practice, the Bodhisattva path. There's a whole approach to practice, which is clearly implying you've done the junior school level, you've controlled your body and speech, you understand karma. You've done the high school level, you understand the delusions, you've controlled your attachment, your anger, your jealousy, you're very sophisticated in being your own therapist. This implies all this. You're already a pretty profound practitioner. You're guarding your body, speech and mind, you're harnessing it, you're living in vows, you're purifying, you're doing a pretty good job. Now you get to the Mahayana one, and you go through the various stages of first practicing equanimity and then developing love and compassion, and you get to the more advanced levels of the Bodhisattva path, which is the advanced level. And this is where you're now applying both the teaching on emptiness and the teaching on compassion. It's a super potent, powerful level of amazing practice that puts atomic bombs on your delusions and quickly helps you get great realizations and quickly helps you get incredible compassion and to realize emptiness. So the essence of this whole approach, as Lama Zopa calls it, as they call it in the teachings, is transforming problems into happiness, okay? Now, on one level, we get it. We do it every day. Many people talk about how the challenges in life are really good for you. That's transforming problems into happiness. It implies that you can reinterpret the situation. I always quote that woman in prison, a particular woman in prison, a friend of mine, Sunny, who's, she was in for 17 years, on death row for 12, for nothing. She did nothing wrong. She just is a hippie, got arrested with her husband. They got accused of murdering 2 policemen. And then they didn't do it. And then finally, even the husband got executed. And she went to the execution while she was in prison too, and his head burst into flames. I mean, can you imagine the suffering? Living like nightmare, 17 years of hell on earth, and she was completely and totally innocent. Now, she is not a Buddhist. She has a view of love and compassion and forgiveness. She did yoga, and she now helps people who've been, who are out of prison. She lives in Ireland with a husband. He was also in prison in Ireland and was accused of murder as well. And they both got out. They're exonerated, and so they're helping other people in the same situation. Now, she was outrageous with her capability. But she didn't hear these teachings. Christians can do this. Obviously, it's a capability we have, but you've got to be pretty special. She was able to see that she could change her mind, that she had a choice to reinterpret this nightmare. So she didn't go crazy. She has not got PSD, whatever we call it, because she worked on her mind when it happened. She's learned to forgive and love and be peaceful and compassion. She's incredible. She worked on her mind. She transformed problems into happiness every single day of those 17 years and came out a happier, wiser person, That's really, this is not unique to the Buddha either. Christians talk this way. Buddha doesn't own this stuff. He's just very good at it, that's all. And this is taught at the Mahayana level. And it's profound, but it implies emptiness. So what's that mean? What's that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Nothing's set in stone. So because we're habituated with anger, attachment, jealousy, not fair, poor me, all the dramas, this is reality for us. So when bad things happen, like I just said before, we are shocked, we're outraged, and our main response is, how dare this happen to me? I don't deserve it. That's the philosophy of anger. That's why we're so good at it in modern culture. So when you've got the view of karma, you already are depleting that view. You don't have that view any longer. Already you're greeting the problems. Already you're able to do that. By the time you get to this really heavy level of practice on the bodhisattva path, which is the great practice of the greatest bodhisattvas, you would rather have something bad happen. Why? Because the second your attachment doesn't get what it wants, okay? Just even ordinary examples. Forget about the heavy duty ones, like being on death row. But just think about not getting the right coffee, not getting the right cake. The first response is, excuse me, I asked for hot coffee. I want it to be this degrees. I want that cake, and please let me the right cake. That's the first level we say. And that can be reasonable. But on the other hand, if you're really trying to do this practice, you would welcome every time attachment doesn't get what it wants. That millisecond when something bad happens, you greet it, you are happy. Why? Because guess what? Because that is not set in stone. That's because your attachment, which is a view in your mind, wants the thing that you want. So then you say, please can I have the right cake? But if you're practicing this one, you realize that it's not set in stone that that's a bad or good thing. It's just your interpretation that's a bad or good thing. You've made it up. You've decided chocolate cake is the right one, and you've decided carrot cake is the wrong one. Well, guess what? You can change your mind. My friend Sunny was in prison in her cell, and she changed her mind about it. My friend Mitch, he's changing his mind about it. He's deciding, he's ready for that electric jolt. He's going to greet the problem. The last time I talked to him, he's asking me about how he's going to treat the guy who's going to put the hood on his head and electrify his body because he's got to be fried alive because he was tried in the 80s and that's the law. So he said, how will I think about this guy? So he's trying to have compassion for the man who's going to murder him. He's changing his mind. He's changing his interpretation of it. That's what transforming problems into happiness means, because they're not set in stone. That's the emptiness component. So because ego wants what it wants, then we all get upset when we don't. So when changing it is being glad a bad thing happens. I mean, it sounds demented for us. It sounds like you're masochistic. But if you want to practice, if you want to practice be the best tennis player, you better play with Federer, okay? He's going to force you to your best game. You don't sit there and burst into tears and, how dare you hit balls at me like that, Mr. Federer? You will be greeting the problem, and you want to play the best tennis, so you've got to play the best player. Well, this is the quickest way to rid the mind of attachment and aversion and to smash ego grasping that believes everything is inherently this and that, because they're not. And it's the way to get more compassion. So we do our best. Once a month, try it, okay? Be happy when the bad thing happens, And the other one is when you're really noticing, when you're really trying to work on emptiness, and one of the key practices to realize emptiness of yourself is you're glad when a bad thing happens because you catch the ego rising up. It's almost like, when someone insults you and you're grabbing the opportunity to see the ego, you say, oh, please insult me again. I want to try and get that one right, Or a car nearly runs you over. Oh, please run me over again so I can try and see where the ego is working. So you take all these experiences as grist for the mill, but you've got to be advanced to do this. This is, as Pavanka Rinpoche says, you've got to be a suitable vessel to do this level of practice. In an ordinary relationship with your husband's mean to you, you'll have a mental breakdown. But if you're really practicing, you'll be glad he's mean to you. It sounds demented, but it's logically true, because nothing has an inherent nature, and you use it as an opportunity to smash the enemy, which is the delusions. It's the quickest way to get enlightened, but it's very brave. Are we communicating, people?
Yeah, we are communicating, though. Venerable, it's like it's kind of like the last port of call. If I'm completely stuck, then okay, I'll do thought transformation. But meanwhile, I'm going to try and fix everything and make everything
That's
nice.
Right. Well, that's how we are, isn't it? I mean, and the things, don't get fundamentalist about it, you know. We say, I've got to transform problems. I've got to be in this miserable relationship. I've got to stay. I mean, we can get really neurotic. If you don't like that job and you can't cope, leave the damn job, for God's sake. You don't have to be a martyr, you know. Don't hear it like being a martyr. And if it's with the wrong view, we can hear it like that. It's totally inappropriate. You've got to be ready to do this. It's a highly advanced level of practice, you know. But we can try when you have no choice. And that's why our friends in prison don't have a choice. Don't have the luxury. But if they can do this level, it's profound, you know. It's profound. Then at least you're happy while it's all happening. You got to go execute it. No?
Venerable, maybe can we have a short break, and then there are a couple of questions about purification and emptiness.
Okay, sure.
So shall we have
5 minutes?
5 minutes or 10 minutes?
5. Oh, you want 10?
5 minutes.
5's enough.
5's enough.
Yep. Okay.
Okie dokie.
I'm here. I'm still here. I'm here. Have you unpacked me? Have you unthinking me?
Yes, here you are. Okay, I have unpacked you. You are here.
Okay, what's the question?
So there's quite a few. One of them, to continue on about this thought transformation thing. So from Alicia. So, for instance, taking up the idea of not getting what the ego, you know, wants. So if we wanted a nice hot cup of coffee and we got a really, cold cup of coffee.
Exactly, yeah.
What's the workings that we go through to feel like?
I mean, forget about being on death row when you're innocent. That's like jumping in the deep end. But we can practice with the baby ones first. That's our trouble, because we think life is so nice and we wait till the dramas happen before we start working. But if we work at the simple level first, then we're ready for the bad things, whether it's cancer, your husband leaving you, or whatever. So the point is, the process is you got to catch your mind, because the first instinct when you don't get what you want is kind of, how dare. I ordered, I'd rather have this hot. The first second that you taste that coffee, and and like in America, I have my coffee, I used to drink, not now, but I want it to be 180 degrees. I don't know what it is in Celsius. I'm used to the American measurements. So the first thing I taste, instantaneously, I recognize it's not what I wanted. So the first response is your attachment. And because you're in a cafe and you pay for it, you have this sense of entitlement, isn't it? And on one level, that's reasonable. If they did a bad job, professionally, it's appropriate. And if you can be humble and patient and kind, and please be so kind to give me hot coffee. But it's up to what your mind is doing. So, but if you see your attachment really strong and you're kind of immediately outraged, then before you even speak, if you want to practice this, you would go, well, you talk to yourself. It's all in 1 second. You won't have to speak it out to your friend. One analysis would be, well, just because I think hot coffee is the only way to have coffee, that doesn't mean cold coffee can't be nice also. So then you go, okay, I'm happy, thank you. And they say to you, oh, was your coffee nice? Because you asked them for hot. And she comes up and says, oh, is your coffee nice? Of course it's nice. I thank you very much. That's a profound practice of humility, patience, and putting an atomic bomb under attachment. But everything's contextual. It could be the person is rude to you, and that could be another practice. You accept it, let them be rude, but you've got to know what you're capable of. If you're a little martyr already and you sit running around being like a doormat for people, that's really not the practice at all. That's why Pavanka Rinpoche says you've got to be a suitable vessel to do this. You've got to know where you're at. If you're a martyr and you're a doormat, you've got to stand up. You've got to say, no, I'd like the coffee hot, please. That's a different practice. So you've got to know where you're at. You've got to know your own mind, what your capability is. And different times, different things, different time, maybe one time it won't matter. And, I'd rather have hot coffee, please, and ask it for again. So you've got to know your mind and know what you've got to practice when. Got to be on the alert every second, Isn't it? Right.
Then about purification. So Onyx asked about daily purification. is it enough to absolve us of our past life karma, or can more be done?
Well, everything's a process, isn't it? You've got you've got a 1,000-meter tree, which is like 20 meters in circular. You just go tap away with an axe every now and again. You've got an awful lot of work to chip away at it. So purification, Lama Zopa says we are insane not to do the purification practice every day. And the logical reason is, given that we're still in samsara, you might not be a rapist or a torturer. That's not the issue. We're just ordinary samsaric people with delusions, following our delusions every day. So naturally creating lots of negative karma every day. It's just natural. It's normal. It's how we all are. So, like just with a garden, we know gardens are very dynamic, especially if you're living in the tropics like Brisbane or Queensland. You leave one garden for a week, it's going to start growing under your house. So you've got to be under control. You've got to be doing a bit of weeding and controlling it every day. It's a really good example, because it's the example of things growing. You don't just stop growing. It's just its nature to keep going. Well, that's samsara. That's the mind. So given that you've been doing ordinary things all day, you've got to get ahead of the game and do a bit of a purification practice at night. You put atomic bombs on those habits. Well, the purification practice is this very powerful psychological process, Karma's just psychological. Karma's just the mind. So then what do? You do the 4 R's. And the stronger you do these, the stronger you wield that axe, the more likely the tree is to come down. You just touch on it every now and again. Oh, I tried to chop the tree down today. You did it 3 times with 3 little hits. Nothing will ever happen. So the more energy you put into your axe wielding, the more likely the tree will collapse. The more energy you put into your poor opponent powers, the more likely you're going to purify your karma. So what you're doing is you have regret. You recognize, I did kill, I did steal, I did lie, I did badmouth my boyfriend, I did have that abortion. Whatever you want to think about, the actions you've done that harm others, it's the first level, regret. And regret is not guilt. Regret isn't, oh, I did that and I'm a bad person. No, regret is, it's just like I ate the sugar. You don't say, oh, I ate sugar, I'm a bad person. You say, I ate sugar, what an idiot, I can't believe it, I don't want diabetes, quick, what'll I do about it? So regret's a very wholesome attitude of owning the fact you've done things with your body and speech that harm sentient beings, which means you've left seeds in your mind that'll ripen as future suffering, and you don't want suffering, baby. That's the basis. So you regret it out of a very wholesome, self-respectful attitude. I don't want future suffering, I'm sick of suffering. So I regret the killing, the stealing, the lying, the bad-mouthing, whatever. And then since beginning this time, whatever I've done that has sowed seeds in my mind, which are sitting there in my mind waiting to ripen as suffering, I don't know what suffering. So the more you have regret, it's self-respect. It's not guilt, it's not neurotic, it's powerful. Then you think, naturally, well, whom can I turn to give me the medicine to purify this? Whom can I turn to, Well, Buddha's our doctor. It's a second step. And this is where it's different from the Christian one. If I'm a Christian, I will regret the bad things, but because God said not to do them, so then my next step is I have to turn to God and ask him to forgive me. This is a very powerful concept in our culture, forgiveness. So we think forgiveness gets you off, kind of purifies you. Well, that's like for the Buddha going to the doctor and confessing that you smoked cigarettes and begging her to forgive you, assuming that that'll stop you getting cancer. It doesn't work like that. That's not the Buddha's view. You regret the smoking because you don't want cancer. You don't need to say that to your doctor. It's a natural law. So you regret killing and stealing and lying and bad-mouthing and breaking your vows or whatever because you don't want future suffering. You've got to hold that strongly in your heart because you know you're sick of suffering. Then you turn to, whom can I turn to? The Buddha. He's like your doctor. So you rely upon the Buddha. He's not going to purify you. Your doctor doesn't purify you. She just gives you the methods. You purify yourself. So you rely upon the Buddha. The second step is reliance on the Buddha. Refuge, the first one. You visualize Buddha above your head, depending on the practice you do, and then the second part is you rely upon sentient beings, and this is where you have compassion now for those you've harmed. The first one is you have compassion for yourself, you regret it because you're sick of suffering. Now you have compassion for those you've harmed, and I must purify for their sake. This is a really powerful one. And then if you're brave enough, you also have compassion for those who've harmed you. Why? Because they will suffer in the future as a result of the actions they've done to you. This is pretty powerful. Then the third one is the remedy. You apply the antidote. So in this case, one of the most powerful antidotes, all the Tibetan lamas would say, is where you do this visualizing of the Buddha and you recite the mantra. This is where, Glynis's question. Very powerful practice, the most potent of the antidotes. You visualize this nectar and you're using creative imagination because you see the mind creates everything. Your mind, as Lama Yeshe says, we create negativity with our mind, so we purify it by creating positivity with our mind. It's the natural opposite. It's the antidote. But we tend to think, I'm a bad person. What's the point of doing purification? I'm still a bad person. That's demented. You're not. You purify. The stronger you have the regret, the stronger you have the reliance and the compassion, and the stronger you do this imagining, purifying, and saying the mantra, invoking the power of the Buddhas to help you support the purification. You purify those tendencies. And the fourth step, the most important, as Pavanka Rinpoche says, is you make the resolve, the 4 R's, the resolve to change. You talk to yourself and you work it out. If you're regretting bad mouthing your boyfriend every day, maybe you can't say, I will never do that again. So you maybe give yourself a timeline. I won't do it for 10 hours. Then you go to sleep and you won't do it for 10 hours. You'll keep your commitment. But if you've got vows, you reiterate, I will never kill, I will never lie, I will never steal. And you strengthen that habit in your mind. You dig the groove of that habit in your mind. This is the most powerful one. That's how you purify all karma. Okay. What this is doing is putting atomic bombs under those tendencies and under those karmic imprints. There are 2 things, the tendency to do it and the karmic imprint. So by doing the purification practice, you put atomic bombs under those things that you regretted and purified. But then the real purification is finally when you cut the root of all delusions by realizing emptiness. Of course, that's abstract to us initially, and we'll talk about it, but that's when you do the real purification. That's the real purification. What you're doing in this process of the 4 steps is you're putting atomic bombs under these habits and tendencies so you can get ahead of the game. But you uproot them finally when you realize emptiness. And we have to understand the logic of that, which is not necessarily evident to us until we've studied the teachings a bit, So you've got to keep doing it, keep removing. I mean, we've got countless lives of negative imprints, so we've got to keep purifying. And what it's doing is, when you remove the weeds out of the way, the flowers can begin to grow, can't they? And as Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do this practice every day. Insane. It's our mind. We purify, It's very powerful. Powerful psychology. And the other thing is, too, doesn't matter, whatever. Okay, well then, where does emptiness all fit into this? We've talked about this so many times, we've all heard it so many times, and it's also confusing to us. And that's only because what Buddha's telling us is that this deepest delusion, the primordial ego grasping, the colloquial term for the root delusion that underpins attachment and aversion and all the other dramas, is because it's so primordial, we don't recognize it. So when someone points out a mistake and you don't even understand what they're saying, because you don't recognize it, so it's really hard. So we don't recognize. So why is he telling us that? So what he's telling us, what Buddha's telling us, first of all, in general, as we've been talking, that in general, these neurotic states of mind, the first category of negative states of mind, they are basically have 2 functions. They are deeply disturbing to oneself, that's the suffering part, and they are liars. They are literally misconceptions. Well, there's a whole range of misconceptions that Buddha says we have. The root one, which underpins all the others. But the others are, when we're overrun by attachment, we believe that John will make me happy. We believe it's his job to make me happy. We believe that the happiness will come from the cake. So that's a lie. Then we get angry because we assume he shouldn't do that. So that's a lie. Then we believe that our mother made us. Buddha says not being rude, but that's a lie. It's not like it is. It's not being rude. That's not like that. She didn't make you. She gave you a body. How kind she is. But she did not give you anger and love and compassion, baby. That's yours. Then we think, even saying a creator, I'm not being rude, but Buddha would say that's a misconception. He's not being rude about it. He says it's his observation. That's a misconception. We're not made by a creator. The misconception that things are permanent when they're impermanent. The misconception, all of these are layers and layers and layers of misconceptions pervading our mind, that because we've thought them for so long, and because we're born in a culture and an environment that reinforces those views, that of course we think they're the truth. And this is not being fundamentalist. Buddha's allowed to say something is wrong. Einstein will tell us that things are, in fact, relativity is true. He's not telling us we must believe him. This is the crucial point. We're so used to thinking this is called dogma, and that we have to believe it, because that's naturally the view when you have a creator. You're not supposed to prove the creator right. That's extreme arrogance. You're supposed to believe the creator, but that's not the view in Buddhism. Buddha does not want us to believe a damn word he says. It's just ignorance. It's just intellectual laziness to believe something. You don't believe that 1 + 1 is 2. You go prove it. You don't believe that botany works, you go prove it. That's the Buddha's approach. So he's allowed to tell us how things are. That's his observation, but he's not asking us to believe him. That's the way to think about it. But this is what he's saying. All these misconceptions in the mind that are pervading our mind is imbued with them, and they inform the way we see the world, and they are the source of our suffering. That's the point about it. It's not just getting it all intellectually right so you pass your philosophy exam. No, the point is that Buddha's making that the delusions in our mind are the reason we suffer. And the reason to fix your delusions is so you stop suffering. It's not some intellectual reason, just to be smarty pants. Not like that. So we have to listen to that. And so if you want to buy into Buddha's view, that's your decision. And you take it as your hypothesis and you gradually prove it step by step. So we've got all these wrong views, he says. We learn about them with karma, then we learn about them when it comes to attachment and aversion in high school, then we go to the bodhisattva path, we learn about how compassion, and then we get to the final stages where we start to realize emptiness. We start to get to the root of the problem. We start to attack the root delusion. And all the earlier work prepares our mind for that. Can't just leap into this. So we learn it in the framework of the two truths. This is the perfect way to learn it, the best way to learn. So what does that mean? The Buddha says things have a conventional nature and things have an ultimate nature. Things have a conventional nature and things have an ultimate nature. Okay, we don't talk this way, but this is how he's talking. So the shorthand for conventional is dependent arising, that everything in the universe that exists in dependence upon various factors. So we go, well, yeah, who cares? Because we can't get the point. Because he's telling us that right now we believe things aren't dependent arising. We believe things are set in stone. We believe things aren't caused. We don't think we think this because the mistakes are so primordial, but we have to start recognizing those mistakes. So he's telling us this is how reality is, which implies that we don't realize that's how reality is. Everything is interdependent. Now, there are 3 levels of dependent arising. There's hundreds of ways in which things exist dependently. Short does not exist without long. Up does not exist without down. Fat does not exist without short. Thin. We get that. That's a simple example of dependence. Causes and effects are dependent arisings. Cause and effect are intimately connected. There's different ways. So here, the Buddha presents 3 particular ways, each the second more subtle than the first, and the third the most subtle and the real one. And these broadly are arguments with the prevailing views at the time when he was around, when he studied with all the other people before him, and he's arguing with their views about reality. So he presents these 3 levels of dependent arising. And the first one is cause and effect. Like I said, karma is a great example of cause and effect of the person called me. Things are the product of cause and effect. They're not set in stone. They're not permanent. They're not unchanging. They're not caused. So then the second level of dependent arising, which is a really nice one to talk about, and we talk about this one many times, and I'll talk about it again, is that things exist in dependence upon their bits and pieces. Things exist in dependence upon their parts, which sort of, again, sounds kind of boring. Like, who cares, And why is a good reason, and we're going to go into this one. The third one, the real one, that gets us to the real logic, that proves the ultimate reality, that therefore nothing has an intrinsic nature, which is what dependent arising proves, is that everything is dependent upon the mind calling it that. This is the subtlest level of dependent arising, and it's the real meaning of Buddha's teachings. But let's look at the second one. It's very tasty, and if we've done that, if we've been together before, you'll recognize this. So this is very powerful. So let's first of all look at the first level of conventional reality. The Buddha's saying everything we can see, everything we cognize, is as long as we're in samsara, which means as long as we're caught up in this root delusion and attachment and aversion, then everything will appear wrongly to us. As Lama Zopa says, at the moment, with our minds full of ego grasping and attachment and aversion and all the other delusions, then whatever out there in the world, the way it appears back to us is in the aspect, as they say in Buddhist psychology, in the aspect of whatever's in our mind. This is the thing we talked about last time, I think, in Lama Yeshe's Mahamudra book, how the mind functions like a mirror. And a mirror, if it's a dirty mirror, obviously what's reflected in it will appear wrongly. If the water is turbulent, the tree on the river bank will appear crooked. So the way our mind works, and this is pretty abstract for us, we don't think this way. This is the way we understand, when we begin to understand the way the mind works conceptually. We live in the level of concepts, and there's a very artificial way of conceiving, of realizing things, of cognizing things. So our mind is like a mirror, and everything out there reflects back to our mind, independence of what's in our mind. It's pretty obvious. If you're always angry, everything will look ugly. If you're always attached, then it will look delicious. So we don't realize that our mind is doing it because we think the cake is delicious. We think John is delicious. We think the ex-boyfriend is ugly. We never think our mind is making it up. We know this. So things appear wrongly to us. So now the first thing is, though, we have to first establish, because everything that exists, everything is existing as a dependent arising. So the particular level of dependent arising here, everything exists independent upon its bits and pieces, its parts, which means it's not set in stone, it's not frozen in space, it's not concrete and solid. So let's use the example of the phenomenon called I. There are countless phenomena in the universe, and there are many synonyms used for that which exists. Phenomenon, object of knowledge, existent, established base. So a cup, a thermos, a watch, a toilet, a person, a lamp. You first establish what that thing is, you get a definition of it, you all agree with it, you shake hands, you tick the box, and now we can begin to talk about a lamp, talk about a thermos, talk about a watch, talk about a person. You've got to get the definition clear first. So we're all on the same page. And then we observe how it exists first conventionally. So let's look at the object, the phenomenon, the existent, called person. We are one of those. We're not a lamp, we're not a toilet, we're not a watch, we're a person. We fit the definition of a person. So, person, the word person, self, I, me, myself are synonymous. So we are an example of one of those types of phenomena, a person, okay, or I. So the Buddha is roughly speaking telling us at this level of mistake, roughly speaking, he says, because of this ego grasping, we believe with 1 billion% certainty every millisecond, and have since beginningless time, we believe that within all these bits and pieces here, and if you start to count the bits and pieces that make up a person, there must be thousands. You've got all the bits and pieces of the body, and you have all the bits and pieces of the mind, the love, compassion, this moment of mind, that moment of mind. You've got millions of bits and pieces of the mind, and we have millions of bits and pieces of the body. So we are made up of body and mind, made up of parts. It's pretty clear. So he says, because of this ego grasping, we believe with certainty that there is in here somewhere, among all these thousands of bits and pieces, as my friend Penday says, walking hand in hand with all those parts, there's a very special part, like a boss part, a very special part, and that part is called I. We believe this with certainty. Our language expresses this. We say, I have a nose. I did not do that. And when we say okay, this is the point now, this is the analysis we have to do. And in the beginning it sounds very boring and intellectual, but we've got to get it to this level of clarity of logic and analysis. Otherwise you cannot break down this deep misconception. So they talk about one argument is, if something exists, it's going to be one thing, or it's more than one. You can't have it both ways. So, this is one argument here. It's always the same argument I use. If some of you are familiar, you'll recognize this argument, this discussion. So I will tell you that I have a watch. And without analysis, you can look in my hand and you'll see there's a watch, okay? And you quickly check, you'll hear the sound coming out of my mouth, you look in this direction and you'll hear me say the words, I have a watch. And because you know what a watch is, and you know that the word I refers to this person, and you'll check the box and you'll go, yep, she's got a watch, very good. If you don't analyze, but let's analyze it, because what we don't realize is there's some delusions informing those words that we say in our mind, and we've got it wrong. So if you say, I have a watch. Now, before we go on with this one, this is a good example, and this is a good example. This is a correct example. So if you check how many phenomena I mentioned, well, you'll all know I mentioned 2 objects of knowledge, two things that exist. One is called an eye and one is called a watch. Well, it's easy to prove, because if it's true, you've got to point out two, in this case, separate and independent things. And you can. It's very easy. You can say there's the watch and there's the eye. And the watch is not the eye and the eye is not the watch, which means you've got two things. It's really easy to prove. I'll tell you another statement, and this is where it gets tricky. I have a nose. Now, without analysis, that's a true statement. I do have a nose. There it is, look. But this is a mistake. The first one wasn't a mistake. I was making a mistake in what I said. That's not a mistake. That's a true statement, and it's valid. And we found two separate things. Now here, we believe the same thing. We believe when I say the word nose, it's true. In this case, you can point out the thing that's called the nose. You've defined the nose as that part of the body that's got two holes that helps you breathe. Let's say that's the definition of a nose. Now that fits that definition right here, doesn't it? So then you've got the other noun, or the pronoun in this case, is the word I. So we naturally think, if we search in here, just like we can find a nose, we're also going to find a piece called I. We believe this absolutely implicitly, and we act like that. You know, if Miffy says, "Oh, Robina, your nose is so fat," and I'll say, "How dare you insult me?" Well, she technically would say, "No, Robina, I didn't insult you. I insulted your nose." We laugh at that, but this is how it would be. And this is the point now. This is the argument to show you don't have a separate I. It's a perfect argument. So if we can see with the watch and the person called Robina, they are separate. My watch breaks. Robina is not affected. She doesn't collapse and die when her watch breaks. If Robina drops dead, the watch doesn't stop working. Why is the crucial point? Because they don't have a dependent relationship. They don't have a dependent relationship. That's the point. But now, I have a nose. We believe it's the same thing as before. There is an I that is the owner of the nose. We believe it. We feel it's like this puppeteer in there who runs the show. We don't ever articulate it. We never search for it. We just believe it. And this is a gross mistake. So, this is the point. If I say I have a nose and a hand, and my hand cuts off, my nose will not feel pain, will it? My nose will not feel pain because it doesn't have a dependent relationship. In the simple sense of function, it doesn't have a relationship with the hand. To function, my hand does not need a nose to function. My nose does not need a hand for it to function. Of course, they're dependently part of the same body. That's not the issue here. They're very precisely not dependent on each other for their function. So, if my hand hurts, my nose is kind of going, phew, what a relief. It's not me. I'm happy. I'm not hurt. Poor old hand. We know that. So then we have the same feeling about the eye. So the point is this. If there were a separate eye, just like there's a separate nose and a separate hand, if there's another component called I that doesn't have a direct relationship except to be the boss, but is not affected by the hand, then if my hand hurts, the I in there will go, oh, phew, I'm glad it's not me, and you'll have compassion for the poor old hand, if the I is independent. But we know it's not like that. We know that there is an I, but not separate. Not separate. You can't separate them. The same here. My thermos has a base. That's a fact. My thermos, one noun, has a base, another noun, two phenomena, a thermos and a base. So we naturally think there's one thing called a thermos and there's a separate thing called a base. But you take the base away, and what have you got now? You don't have a base anymore. You have a piece of circular metal, and what do you have here is a metal tube. You do not have a thermos because you can't separate a thermos from a base, but you won't be able to point out a thermos that's separate from the base. It's the same with the person. So we have an I, but as Lama Zopa says, it's not the parts. The I is not the parts. The I is not the nose. The I is not the hand. The I is not the shoulder. The I is not the mind. But there is an I, but you can't separate. But they're still different phenomena. And why are they different phenomena? Do the definition of an eye. An eye is the name we give to a combination of body and mind. What is a hand? Hand is the name we give to 5 digits with a thumb that holds things. That's not the same definition. So an eye can't be a hand, and an eye can't be a nose, and an eye can't be a heart and a this and a that. And it can't be separate from them either. So they're the arguments we have to do. And this is what you do in meditation, eventually for the penny to drop, that the I isn't oneness with the parts, and the I isn't separate from the parts, but there still is an I, but it's an interdependent I. And that's the tricky part. We want to separate it. We want to point it out in isolation as not being dependent. You cannot find such a thing. As His Holiness says. And the other thing, okay, that's so far that one. That analysis, that's like one of the analyses we have to do. There's several analyses in there. Okay, several. And it takes time.
Could you say then that the I is a dependency?
I is a dependent arising. An I is an interdependent thing, meaning it exists in dependence upon the parts, but you can't point it out as a separate thing. That's the point. That's the point. And that's tricky because you see, when we say nose, we go immediately to there. When we say I, we're not quite sure what to point to. There's 2 mistakes we make. We either think all of me is I, this is I, and that's a very big view in the West, this big bag of bones is I, or experientially we feel there's a little I in there that is like the puppeteer, is the owner, and that's how we feel, you know. So there's either way we think it's a separate I running the show, or it's the oneness with. And we've got to argue with both of those, because you're not going to find an I that's separate from the parts, and you're not going to find an I that's oneness with the parts. But you've got to understand these words, use them properly. We don't know what it means. We're talking about an independent I. We're talking about an independent I, which is one of the mistakes we make. And of course, we don't think we make this mistake. We've not even thought about it before. So it's hard to hear it, you know. So the other thing is, stop there, full stop, turn the page, new section. The word emptiness really throws us, okay? It really, really gets us so confused. And so one of the biggest mistakes, falling into the abyss of the great mistake, as Tsongkhapa says, is when we hear there is no independent I, no independent thermos, no independent anything. We can't hear it in a nuanced way. We just hear it as, oh, there is no I, might as well kill myself. So we sort of fall into the abyss of the great mistake and we become nihilistic. So when we understand the 2 truths, conventional reality, dependent arising, ultimate reality, emptiness, these are the 2 truths, and we have to find to bring these 2 together. They each refer to the other. They each imply the other. But right now we have the 2 extreme views. When we hear emptiness, we hear nothingness. And we hear dependent arising, we hear somethingness. And we can't get these 2 together. And this is a major mistake we make. We're like drunken sailors going between these 2 wrong views all the time. The 2 extreme views, Buddha says. And this is a philosophical view, but it's in our bones. We have this embedded in our mind from countless lives of practice. So we have to identify those lies and then begin to unpack them and argue with them. And then we start to get in the right track. Then when we hear dependent arising, which is conventional truth, and we hear emptiness, ultimate truth, we don't hear them as opposite. We hear them as coming together. That's the big practice to do. Then we're on the right track. So the word emptiness, it really gets us, you know. No, I've just begun. Okay, I've just begun on this word emptiness. I have to continue. Okay, so the ordinary word, empty is an ordinary word we use in everyday life, isn't it? Empty. My cup, we're looking here and we go, oh, my cup's empty. You know, or you go into the bank account, oh my God, my bank account's empty. We know what it means. It's very simple. We know what it means. It's just a casual way of talking. We know that there's no dollars in your bank. We know there's no tea in your cup. We get that. We say it's empty. Of what? Tea. It's empty. The bank account. Of what? Dollars. We don't say, oh, my cup is empty of tea, but we know it implies that. So this is the point here now. This is a bit tricky, but it's not really. It's important. The way the mind cognizes things, one way of saying it is it cognizes, it's my way of saying it, it cognizes nouns. So things that exist, this first step in Buddhist philosophy, you learn all the synonyms of that which exists. Phenomenon, object of knowledge, existent, I told you those. There's several of those. So everything that exists is an object, is an object of knowledge, is of an existent, is a noun, in other words, a noun. The mind cognizes nouns. It cognizes actions, events, things, people. So, when I say my cup is empty, what is the thing that your mind cognized? What's the noun? Put that into a noun. Your mind cognized the absence of tea in your cup. So if there were tea in your cup, tea is a phenomenon. It does exist. So you'd say my mind is cognizing tea. If there's no tea in your cup, your mind is cognizing a phenomenon called the absence of tea. And that's what the word emptiness refers to. It's obviously Buddha's not talking about there's no tea here. He's not talking about no dollars. He's saying that we think that in here somewhere there is a little mini me that runs the show. He says we believe that with absolute knowledge, absolute belief. There is a little mini me in there, and our words express that. I have a nose, Don't insult me. I nearly fell off the mountain. No, your body did. Be precise. But we have that view. There's a little I in there that, so then we are cognizing now something that doesn't exist. So the Buddha says, when you've realized that, when you realize that I that you think is there isn't, you just don't go, oh, well, there's no I now, and chuck it out, and say now there's no I. What you just realized is the absence of that fantasy I, and that's not the same as just realizing there's no I. So as His Holiness said, the I isn't empty of existing inherently because you can't find it, and you won't find an independent I. But that's not the real premise. The I is empty of existing intrinsically because it's a dependent arising. This is the really powerful argument. And when you have this argument, you'll never fall into the abyss of the great mistake. You will never make the major mistake that's in all the literature, in people's minds, among Buddhists, that, oh, well, there's no I. We say it like that, and we say, oh, well, there's no I, so nothing matters anyway. That's nihilism, and that is not the meaning. It's more nuanced than that. So a really simple example, like I use the example of, say, my black thermos, and Miffy's colourblind and she thinks it's pink. She's so attached to pink. So she thinks my black is pink. Think like this. But she knows intellectually it's not, but her eyes are so wrong. The big mistake is that it makes black appear to her in a mistaken way, even though she knows intellectually. Well, we can't force her to change. So what we should do is fix her eyes. Her eyes are the problem. So we fix her eyes. But this is the point now. Because she's always believed that black is pink, always, because she's addicted to that. But now her eyes are fixed. We're going to show her the black thermos again. She will get the shock of her life because now she's seeing the truth. But the first thing she will see isn't the black thermos. The thing she will see is, oh my God, it's not pink. So the object she first cognized is the object called the emptiness of pink, the absence of pink. And then she will see the real black thermos. Then she'll get dependent arising realization. This is a really good example. So, and this is the point too. The only person, when I look in my cup and I'll go, oh my God, my cup's empty. The only person who would notice that their cup is empty of tea, listen to this now, it's important, is the person who expects tea there. The only person, like Miffy, who will go, oh my God, it's not pink, is obviously the person who believed it was pink. The only person who will, recognize, let's say you think there's $500 in your bank, you're convinced there's $500, and you look in the bank, and there is actually a zero written, but you get the shock of your life. because you don't, this is the point now, you don't see $0. The zero will appear to you, but because you're expecting 500, you'll get this panic attack. Oh my God, where are my $500? So the phenomenon you cognize is known as the absence of $500. It's a really powerful point, and that's not the same as zero. You know, zero, Dalai Lama says it's like as if you're looking for an eye, and you chuck out the nose and the hand and the heart and the pee-pee and the caca, and you end up with nothing. He says that's not the meaning of emptiness, and that's the point about the dollars. So the zero is a good example. That's nihilism. There's no dollars there. But that's not what you cognize when you see the zero. What you cognize, the object you cognize, is this powerful object for your mind called the absence of your precious $500. So in other words, it's completely conceptual, it's made up. The only person, I mean, if you ask me to look in your bank account, I will see the truth. There are no dollars. But you won't see no dollars. You will see the absence of your precious $500. So $0 is not the same object as the absence of 500. It's completely different. And so that's the same with the I. When the penny drops finally, and we see nakedly within here that with certainty we realized emptiness. The emptiness of what? The absence of what? The intrinsic I. Of course, we don't know what an intrinsic I means. It's an I that doesn't depend on anything else. It's an independent I. So let's use the word independent. When we have all our lives have believed in an independent I, we've taken it as a given. And one day in meditation, after much practice, we will see nakedly that there has never been, and there could never be, that kind of I. That's not the same as saying, oh, well, there's no I. It's completely different. And that's the point. Emptiness is merely not saying there's no I. There's no I that is independent. And then you realize dependent arising I. Then you realize the subtle meaning of dependent arising, because that's the main logic to prove it. So it's much more nuanced than we think. But we've got to learn, like everything, got to learn the words, learn the language, learn the words, and then slowly we'll get the experience of them, you know.
So then, Venerable, why isn't the mind or the consciousness the I?
It's very simple. A very simple example. Let's define what we're talking about first. So what is the mind? Give me the definition of the mind. Just give a definition. It's that which cognizes. So we just say it's that which cognizes. Will that do?
Yep.
So we agree that's the definition of the thing called a mind. It's that which cognizes. And we have to prove that. Okay, this is a really good point too. So what's that, Mummy? It's a thermos. And then she'll give you the label. Now you've got to have the definition. You can't just accept it. So what's a thermos? What is it? And it's got two parts, the definition. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. This metal, blah, blah, blah. The second part tells you its actual function. It keeps my tea warm. So we agree on that definition, right? So then we have to then prove it, that I put the tea in and we wait an hour and we'll see the tea is still hot. Then that we have now proven that is a valid definition, because we've proven it to be true. You don't just accept it. So let's just say we have a definition of the mind. It's that non-physical part of you that cognizes things. Let's just say we say that's the definition, and we agree with that. Now, what's the definition of a person? I will tell you a rough definition. It's not quite right, but we'll say this. A person is the name we refer to the combination of a body and a mind. Do you agree with that? Will that do for you? So the definition of a person is a name given to the combination of a body and a mind. And the definition of a mind is that which cognizes. They're not the same definition, are they? Are they? Are they the same? They're separate definitions, aren't they? So how can the I be the mind? They're two separate things. It's not possible. So it proves the mind and the body is not the I. You can't be both. You've got to make up your mind. Is it an I or is it a mind? Make up your mind. They're different phenomena and different definitions. So they can't be the same. Very simple. Do you understand? That's one good. There's one good logical reason why the body can't be the I, or the mind can't be the I.
So then, when we're thinking about this, then what is it then that goes from life to life and carries all of
the mind? The mind goes from life to life. And the mind, if you want to point to either one as being the basis of the label I, which is the subtlest meaning, the mind is the basis of the label I. So you can say the I will continue from life to life, but the interdependent I, the merely labeled I, but it's on the base. But the mind is the actual thing that goes from life to life, and that bears the label I. The label can't be the base. The label can't, there's another argument, the label can't be the base. I can't be the mind. I can't be the body. They're separate phenomena. They're different phenomena. They're not separate. You can't separate them, but they're different. So there is an I, there is a thermos, and there is a base. But you can't separate them, can you? If you separate the base from the thermos, you don't have a base and you don't have a thermos anymore, do you? So you can't, a base is not a thermos and a thermos is not the base. The I is not the body and the body is not the I, but you can't separate them. That's the point. You can't have one without the other. So in other words, they're different, but they're not separate. They're different, but they're not separate. That's the point. They're interdependently existent, but you can't point them out separately, ever. Not possible. That's why there's a subtle level of dependent arising. Same as the thermos and the base. It's very clear. It is a fact that my thermos has a base, and that's two nouns. So if that's an ultimate reality, we have to point out a base and point out a thermos, and you can't. You just can't, because they're interdependent. And all this leads us finally to the subtle level of dependent arising, which is that I is the name, merely the name we impute on the base. And the base, in this case, is the body and the mind. Thermos is the name we impute upon this base. So thermos can't be the base. Robina can't be the body and the mind. These are the type of words we have to learn to understand and think about and use in logic, first intellectually and then experientially in meditation. Of course, it doesn't make sense to us when we hear it first, like anything, Okay, 10 minutes to go. Time goes quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, so that definition has struck a chord,
yes, good.
Between body, mind, and I.
Yes.
So they're different. They're
yes.
not separate.
But they're not separate, but they're different. That's exactly right. You cannot say the I is the body, but you cannot say the thermos is the stuff. This metal stuff and the base, the sides and the lid and the base are not the thermos. But there is a thermos, but you can't point out a thermos separate from the pieces. You can't point out an I that's separate from the parts. You cannot point out an I that is separate from the parts. But there is an I, but it's dependent upon the parts. You won't have an I if there's no parts. You won't have a thermos if there's no parts. But we want to find a thermos and the parts. We want to find all these individual things, and that's the trick. We can't.
So the result of understanding this, is it that then emotionally we become more relaxed, more realistic?
You become blissful. You become fearless. You can, like that wonderful story. I'll finish with the story of Lama Zopa. I always tell this story about Lama Zopa. He was recognized as a little boy as the reincarnation of the previous yogi known as the Laudo Lama up in the mountains there. We do a trek every year up there, but of course we can't do it now, but maybe I will do another one next year. Some of you have been with me on the trek, I'm sure. So anyway, we go up the mountain, and there's this place called Laudo. Laudo means onions or radishes. I can never remember what it means. And it referred to this place, this little hole in the wall that was where they stored the radishes and the onions. This is like back in the 1900s, early 1900s, where this yogi called Kunsang Yeshe. He was a layman, a Nyingmapa, a little layman, and he was a hidden yogi, and he'd go back and forth selling salt in Tibet and whatever. And then towards the last part of his last 20 years of his life, like a lot of these people, he wanted to find a place to meditate. So he pulled out the radishes and he moved in. So he's known as the radish or the onion lama. I never know which one it means. And that's his little cave. So now that cave is existing up there in the mountains because Lama Zopa was recognized as a little boy, as a reincarnation. So this yogi was a tantric yogi. He practiced all his life, and then he died really perfectly because he was a great meditator. He was able to go through the death process with complete control. So then he was able to choose his rebirth because he'd realized emptiness, and he was quitting samsara, So he in his next life, I mean, this is in hindsight, this little boy born to this mother up there in the mountains, up down the road from this cave. And they all, the Kunsang Yeshe, the Lama had died. So this little boy, and I interviewed his sister about him, she's up there now, she runs the monastery that's surrounding this cave. People go up there for retreats, and we do this trek, we go every year and go do this trek up there and raise money for it, So anyway, she said she was about 6 when he was born, and she said this little boy was slightly different from everybody else. He acted like a lama. He would sit on a box, and he ate his meals on his own, did his own trip, and then every now and again, as soon as Mummy would turn her back, little Zopa's lost. He's gone. He's missing, and there he is. They find him crawling up this hill, which leads to the Laudo cave. They all know it, well, and they always find him. There's a little spot called the resting place halfway up, and they find him curled up asleep with his little bare bottom, asleep up there. So they drag him home. So So by the time he could talk, again, every time Mummy turned her back, Zopa has gone missing. And they find him walking, trudging up this little mountain path to the cave. And she'd say, come home. He'd say, no, that is my home. And he'd point to the cave. So, and his behaviour was very odd and very different. When he played games, he always played the role of a lama. He'd make mud pie dorjies and mud pie bells and mud pie torma cakes. And he would announce that all his benefactors from his past life were coming to his puja. So then Mummy started to check up and thought, well, I better ask the local lama about this boy. Who is he? So he determines that, yes, he does seem to be the reincarnation of the Laudo Lama. Because especially when they're very little, they don't lose their memory. As they get older, they lose their memory. So this vivid memory, he had his memory of all his past benefactors, all these people who used to take care of him in the cave. So anyway, he then got formally recognised and sent off to some monastery or whatever, way up in the mountains, 8 hours up the mountain, Rowaling or something, and he was with his manager. They're very professional, these Tibetans. He had a manager. He's like 8. And he tells this story about what happened. There's this big river, and if you've been up in those mountains, the rivers are really powerful, really turbulent, and the little bridges, these little rickety bridges that wobble when you walk on them, are very scary, So there's one bridge there, and he's got the other side of the big river where he is. He's about 8, it's about 1952 or something. He looks over the river at these weird-looking people. They're pale face, pale eyes, straw-coloured hair. Well, they're white people. He hasn't met white people before. He knows he's a Nepali. He's a brown person. So he really wanted to meet them, So anyway, he was very stubborn and determined, and his manager didn't want him to go because it's really treacherous. But he determined, so he had his bowl of potatoes as a gift, and he's going across the bridge. Well, he falls in the water. And, of course, they don't teach him swimming up there. So he's drowning, and this is how he told the story. He's like 8. He was recognised as a reincarnated Lama, which means he's done the meditation before, he chose his rebirth, he's in control of the process, whatever, which implies he's realised emptiness. It implies it. You couldn't do that without realising emptiness, without not clinging to the I. So the point is this. He said, the head, he said. The head kept coming to the surface for air. So he didn't say, I came up for air, which is how we would naturally talk, because that's the feeling of an I dominates everything. Especially when you're being attacked, then this is what is running the show, this complete hysterical grasping at this I that's nearly drowning, the I that nearly was run over, the I that was offended. It's like a sleeping lion much of the time, and then it wakes up and looms completely large, But he didn't say that. He said the head. I'll talk about this later. Well, there's no later today, but what, next week? So then, he then said to himself, and then he said to himself, the thought occurred to me that the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said, I didn't know anything about emptiness, meaning in that life, up until the age of 8, he never heard the teachings on emptiness, but he said there was no fear. And this is the outrageous point, as Miffy said, will you be happier and more relaxed? You won't believe how you'll be when you stop believing in the fantasy I that has never, couldn't, and never does exist, has never, and can never exist. A fantasy embellishment that is just absurd, an independent I. And that's why we have fear, attachment, anger, all the dramas. We live in fear. We have anxiety and worries. That's the nature of, because we're grasping at an I. So when you realise that there is no such independent I, with such easy words, then you would not have fear. Fear is the flavour, the nature of all the delusions. So you don't have any fear. This is beyond hilarious for us. So we think, this is so interesting, we think if there's no fear, this is what what's his name? Darwin came up with. Instinct for survival. We've observed animals and humans, and when we're attacked, the I rises like a lion, and then it galvanizes into action, and we know what to do. That's our analysis, and that's reasonable, but that's what a samsaric person is. But he didn't have the grasping at an I. So we think if there's no fear, you'd sink to the bottom of the river like a stone and go, oh, well, I'm drowning, what the hell? But no, what you would have seen is a little boy looking like he's panicking, coming to the surface for air, but he was not. His mind would have been as peaceful as if he's walking along the road. It would not have been different, because there is no ego grasping, there is no attachment, there's no jealousy, there's no anxiety, there's no panic, there's no fear. That's impossibility for us in our world. But this is the point that Buddha's making. So his mind was peaceful. His mind would have, but he knew perfectly well it's reasonable to want to go get some air, but he wasn't being freaked out about it. Ah, he said, the person known as Alado Lama is about to die. And so luckily he got saved, his manager saved him. And so why did he say the head? Why did he say the person known as? Because he's used to thinking, because we go, I am about to die. I came up for air. We believe there is a piece in there that's called I that's going for air. We believe there's a piece in there that is called I that is dying. Load of rubbish. And this is a very powerful way to practice. This is where we say, I am angry, I am attached, I am jealous. Stop saying that. They talk about, in Buddhist psychology, there is attachment, there is anger, there is this, there is that. And so to think of it yourself, you don't think, I am Robina. You say, I'm the person known as Robina, because Robina can't be the I, and the I can't be the body and the mind and the mind can't be the I. So it's a really powerful practice. But I remember, as Geshe Tekchok, my philosophy teacher, said, but then someone says to you, what's your name? Oh, I'm the person known as Robina. Well, shut up and just say you're Robina and be done with it. Don't fancy, don't rab it on, you know. But it's a very powerful one, that. The person known as Alado Lama is about to die. But there was no fear. This is the logic, and this is what's so powerful. It's so liberating to hear this, that when you have realized emptiness, finally, you don't suddenly leap, though, from maniac fear to bliss. It's a gradual process. And this is where, when you realize, when you finally understand the absence of that fantasy I you've been clinging to since beginningless time, has never existed and couldn't, then your mind is literally liberated. And it can only be peaceful. It can only be joyful. There is no other option, because the delusions have gone. It's a pretty powerful concept. But the thing is, it doesn't go overnight. You know, but this is the point. It's a gradual process. As soon as you start to work on your body and speech, the servants of your mind, you're already becoming more subdued. You're already becoming more stable. Then you start to work on your attachment and your anger, and you become even more stable. And then you add compassion. You're even more stable. And now it's easy peasy, falling off a log easy, to rid the mind of the rubbish one that's the root of it all. It's a gradual, organic, incremental process. Are we communicating, people? Good enough. 2 minutes to go. Let's watch our mind. Let's watch our mind for 2 minutes. What are you going to say? What?
We can watch our mind for 2 minutes, and then I have another offering for you.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, let's watch our mind for 1 minute. Just one quality minute, as if your life depends on it. Just close your eyes and shut up and pay attention to your thoughts. Whatever happens, just pay attention to your thoughts. Don't try to work it out. Just close your eyes and with strong determination, pay attention to your thoughts for 1 quality minute. Okay, relax. What's your offering?
I'll just pin the video so that you can see it. And okay.
What is it?
It was a little something that I prepared earlier for you, Venerable.
Oh, Miffy, what is it, darling? Another lot.
This one is actually pink Zambala with cakes.
Oh, darling, how delicious. I wish I was there. I'll just have to use my imagination. What are these little girls down there?
So these are the 2 Naga mermaids making offerings, and there is a great big pink wealth vase filled with perfume, and then there's all sorts of cakes, and over on one side there's even a bottle of Chianti.
Oh, cool.
And cupcakes, So this one is called Pink Zambala Land.
Oh, darling, I totally love it. I wish I was there to enjoy it, but I have to just remotely enjoy it.
So it's our offering to you that may you have all of the wonderful cakes, and may we always have your nourishment of the Dharma.
Thank you, Miffy, darling. So kind. Zambala's a Buddha of wealth, isn't he? That's right. Well, thank you, everybody. That's so kind. Okay, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. And I'll see some of you in 7 hours for our little prayer-a-thon. It'll be 11 p.m. Sydney time, Melbourne time, but it'll be earlier. It'll be early morning for us on California coast and the other coast, and mid-morning for New York. So we'll see you in 7 hours, some of you. And you've showed people the email, the connection for Chenrezig, how to get the YouTube channel, have you, Miffy?
Yeah, so I'll stay on the line now, and I'll find the link and put it into the chat.
Fantastic.
Or else people can just email us.
Wonderful.
And please stay safe and well, and we're so much looking forward to next week.
Yes, we'll see what we're going to talk about next week. We'll maybe go more about bodhicitta next week. Okay, everybody, much love. Jangchub sem chogren boche, ma kie panam kie chig, kie panyampa me pa yang gong ne gonju pewa shog. That means maybe compassion, grow and grow and grow and grow in the hearts of all. Never give up, never give up, never give up, never give up. Okay, on yourself and others, never give up. Okay. Like Lama Zopa, even when you're drowning, stay perky. That's the philosophy of the Bodhisattvas. Okay, people, much love. Bye. Thank you. Thanks, Miffy. Thanks, everyone. Much love. Thank you. Bye.